you're following this race extremely closely. We were talking to our DC reporter, Jess Smith, earlier in the show, and she was just discussing how close this race is and how we might not know who actually wins for a couple of days. I'm curious, just from the polls that you've been looking at and from your discussions, what do you think is going to be the outcome of these two races?
If I told you that I knew, I would be lying. These polls are so close that it is almost impossible to tell. And the reason I think that it's so hard to tell is because what we don't know is what voter turnout is going to be. At this moment, if you looked at the polls alone, you would say that Democrats were likely to pull this off, but I'm not sure it's that straightforward. We know that Republicans generally, the last few years certainly, have outperformed in the polls. We know that Republicans are more likely to show up the day of. We also know that Republicans, specifically in runoff races, are more likely to vote than Democrats, but I think we have a different year here. There's a lot at stake. This is for control of the Senate. There's been more money spent in this race than any runoff race in history, and it's really hard to say, but there are a couple things that I'm looking at. Number one, I want to understand the impact of Donald Trump's speech last night, because a lot of people were concerned about Republicans showing up, because why would you show up if more than 50% of Republicans in this moment believe that their votes don't count, that there was voter fraud? Why would you show up and vote? And so the president made his plea last night. My question is it going to be enough for people to say, you know what, it's still worth it for me to go out, even in the middle of a pandemic? I think it might have done enough, but I'm not so sure. The other thing that I'm looking at, I'm sorry, yeah?
I think you're going to go to the thing I wanted to ask you about, which was the phone call over the weekend. It seemed to be, front page news on one group of media, but another group of media, it wasn't quite the headline. So is that going to impact this vote?
So here's what I think. I don't think it's going to change any of the Republican voters' mind. I think most people that were decided to vote for Republican were going to vote for Republican. What I do think that it might do is energize the Democrats. I think people see that and think enough is enough, and we need to get out and vote. And so I think that really the people that are going to be energized by that are Democrats. I don't think it's going to suppress the Republican vote, because I think Trump supporters already decided what they're going to do as far as voting. And I think those never Trump conservatives wouldn't just jump over to the other side as a result of it.
Haley, if the GOP does lose, if they lose one race or if they lose both races down in Georgia, what does it mean for the future of the Republican Party?
I think if they lose both, there's going to have to be a reckoning. The party is going to have to decide who they're going to be. Are they going to be the traditional conservatives, or are they going to be the party of Trump? It's really not the same party that it was before. And I think if they lose, there's going to have to be a decision. Are they finally going to free themselves to Trump, or are they going to continue down the same path? My guess is there's going to be a reckoning. I think if there's 1-1, they can proceed as they have been, but they've really got to do some real deep exploration as to how we got to the place that we are. It's hard to believe that we're even talking about this. It's hard to believe that Georgia might go blue. It's hard to believe they might lose the Senate when it seemed to be a sure thing. And so I think whatever happens, the Republicans are going to have to take a long, hard look at who are they going to be and how are they going to show up 2 years from now in the midterms.
Why would they do the reckoning, though? Because there was a reckoning after the 2012 presidential loss, and there was a whole study, and then it was dismissed. So what good would a reckoning now do? Because it seems it's underway. You've got Republicans who are opposed to the Trump side of the party.
Yes, except you've also seen that most people have decided, most Republicans have sort of gotten in line, even those who were opposed to Trump in 2016. Now, I think there's going to be room for somebody else to rise up. I don't know who that person would be right now that could provide leadership in the Republican Party, but I think there's going to be some questions. Number one, who is going to be the voice of fiscal conservatism? Because that's not what the party is right now. And I think victory speaks, right? And people are going to want to know, if this isn't the winning strategy, how do we get it back? Especially because we're going to see some big changes in this country if the Republicans lose. The Democrats are going to have the House, they're going to have the Senate, and they're going to have the presidency. So they're going to be able to get a lot done. The Republicans are going to have to figure out how they're going to stand up and start winning again. I think it's a very different.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it's just a very different calculus when you've lost all three than it is otherwise.
Yeah, and when you take a look, I guess, just at some of the other prominent Republicans and who we've heard from, especially over the last several weeks, we need to talk about Senator Mitch McConnell and his impact and what that means for the GOP. Is there any thought that he could have possibly hurt the Republicans' chances in these two runoff races at all?
You know, it's a really, really fair question, and I've tried to do a lot of analysis to try and understand its impact. I think that both the Republicans that are running have supported the stimulus. I think they're both more Trump-like in their nature than they are Mitch McConnell-like in their nature. But I think what Mitch McConnell did is one thing. He might have gotten people, Republicans who are never Trumpers, who might not like these two candidates, to say, you know what, it's really important that we have checks and balances in place. We can't afford to lose all three. We need to have some ability to have veto power, to have some balance, to force compromise. And so I think those never Trump conservatives might have seen what Mitch McConnell did and been reminded that it's really important to have checks and balances, because I think there's a lot of conservatives out there who don't like the spending. I think there's a lot of conservatives in Georgia who actually were opposed to the $2,000 because they felt like they were open for most of the time and they're paying for the shutdown that other states had. So I think there was some controversy around that. So I think in some ways what Mitch McConnell did might energize some conservatives who might have otherwise stayed home. But then there's another school of thought as well, where this really harmed the idea that the Republicans are now the party of the people. But I think it actually might have helped a little bit more than people are thinking.
Very quickly, Lee, can Mitch McConnell, even if they win in Georgia, maintain control of his caucus? Because you've got Ted Cruz, you got Josh Hawley. They seem to be ignoring him.
They do seem to be ignoring him. I think it's going to be a very different time in Washington, D.C. after Biden's inauguration. And I think that they're going to have to figure out how they're going to have compromise that's going to happen, especially if the Republicans do keep the Senate. And I think Mitch McConnell does have a good relationship with Joe Biden. I think he has, whether you like him or not, he's a proven politician who is able to negotiate. And so I think there's a chance that he's able to keep it, but who knows? I mean, there's a lot going on behind the scenes now where you've got Ted Cruz, I think, is really trying to make a play right now for a leadership position.
Lee Carter, president of Maslansky and Partners, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Great to be here.